The 2021 NBA free agent shooting guard market is a pretty deep one. Out of all the free agent shooting guards available, a lot of the players are in different stages of their careers. Some are about to get their first big contract, others are in the prime of their careers and are going for that last big deal. And then you get the vets who are looking for another chance of a championship, wouldn't take the minimum for most of them, and they're still just as valuable as others. So in this video, we're going to count down the 10 best shooting guards available this offseason. Obviously there's loads out there, obviously we can't have all of them here, so I'm going to do the top 10 available free agent shooting guards this offseason. At number 10, I've got JJ Reddick here, mainly for reputation, but I got JJ Reddick here. He's 36 years old, and last year as a Pelican, he averaged 8.7 points per game on 36% shooting from 3 on 4.5 threes a game and 95% shooting from the free throw line. Now JJ, he was last on the Mavericks, but he didn't play much due to injury. Now this injury hasn't helped JJ Reddick's case for him to stay in the league, and he'll keep going for one more year instead of retiring. At 36 years old, he's always been a poor defender, but and this injury made him look worse than he was. But I believe if JJ Reddick was 100% healthy, and he can still play for a contending team and do a job, because he's still one of the best shooters in this league, and he's coming off a $13 million contract. I expect him to sign for a contender for a veteran minimum deal. And as a Lakers fan, I'd be more than happy to see JJ as a Laker. He's experienced in the playoffs, and he's a great shooter, and he can be hitting on defensive ends. Philly, when he's on Philly, they came very close to winning getting to an NBA Finals, and I think they hit him well, so he can be hit on the defensive end. He just needs to get 100% healthy. A 36-year-old JJ Reddick can't be dealing with injuries. He's got to be 100% healthy, and just bring him on to hit some threes. That's all. Every contending team needs 3-point shooters, and I think there'll still be a pretty big demand for JJ Reddick from a contender or two, if he's on a minimum. So hopefully JJ Reddick stays in the league, because I like the guy. So I put him at number 10. At number 9, I got Brian Forbes, who's 27 years old, and this year has averaged 10 points per game on 45% shooting from 3 on 5 threes a game and 47% shooting from the field. Now Brian Forbes is currently playing a pretty big role as a knockdown shooter for the NBA finalist Milwaukee Bucks. Now 3-point shooting is pretty much the only thing Brian Forbes can do at a pretty good level. Everything else that Forbes does, he's not good at anything else really. Not a great defender, they can't do much playmaking, rebounder, none of that stuff. But once again, when you're a contending team, you just need 3-point shooters. In the modern NBA, 3-point shooting is key. So I think he's on a pretty cheap contract as well, around $2.5 million contract with the Bucks this year. I expect him to stay at the Bucks, especially if they end up winning the championship. Every team can do with a 3-point shooter. I expect him to get a small pay rise and stay at the Milwaukee Bucks. But if another team comes in and gives him, $5 million, maybe more, I don't know, he might end up moving on. But I think Brian Forbes, he showed this year for the Bucks that he can still play a pretty big role for a contending team. At number 8, we got Josh Richardson, who's 27 years old, and this year averaged 12.1 points per game, 3.3 boards on 33% shooting from 3, 1 steal a game, and also 42% shooting from the field. Now J Rich has an $11 million player option, which he could easily pick up because he had a pretty underwhelming season with the Mavericks this year after getting traded for Seth Curry last season from Philadelphia. Now J Rich is obviously a great defender, we all know this about him. He's one of the better defensive guards in the NBA, but defense is pretty much the only thing. He can score, but he's not very efficient with his scoring. He's a below average 3-point shooter. He did average 12 points per game, but as I said, not very efficient, below average 3-point scorer. J Rich's main thing is defense, and most teams can do that, and he won't get much more than $11 million a year. So I expect him to opt in and stay at the Mavericks for one more year and hopefully improve and then go somewhere else or maybe even resign. So let's look at number 7 now. I got Tailon Horton Tucker, who's only 20 years old, and last year averaged 9 points per game, 1 steal on 28% shooting from 3 and 45% shooting from the field. Also 2.8 assists per game in 20 minutes a game. Now I've seen firsthand the potential of THT as a Lakers fan, and he's a crafty finisher around the rim. He's got a massive wingspan for a guy his size, and he can do some ball handling. He can do some playmaking, take over that responsibility if needed. The only thing he needs to improve on is his 3-point shooting. If he can hit the 3, I've seen the 3, but he's not consistent. If he can get consistent from behind the arc, the Lakers want to keep him anyway, but a lot more teams will be interested in him. Now, he is a restricted free agent, and I expect him to stay at the Lakers, as the Lakers rate him very highly. He'll probably get around $10 million a year for around 4 years, so I expect around a 4-year, $40 million deal for him. Obviously, other teams could go for him because he got plenty of potential, but the Lakers, they wouldn't trade him for Kyle Lowry. They see him as one of their very few young players in their team. I think they keep hold of him, but if another team goes in and offers one of those big contracts you can offer to young players, where it's like $10 million for the first 2 years, and in the last 2 years you're getting paid like a max contract guy. So they could do that and steal him from the Lakers, but I expect the Lakers to keep hold of him. Now let's look at number 6, a former Laker in Danny Green, who is 33 now, and last year averaged 9.5 points per game on 41% shooting from 3 on 6.3 threes a game, also 3.5 rebounds and 1.3 steals. Now Danny Green had a bounce back year in Philly after an underwhelming year for the Lakers. He's a great 3-point shooter, as we all know, and his 3-point shooting went back up from 37% with the Lakers last year to 41% with the Sixers. Now, he's still a great defender at his age, obviously not as good as he used to be, but he's got that size he's an oversized for a shooting guard. He's got the size, the length, and I think he's still a good shooting guard and a very good defender as well at his age. Now, when he went out in Game 4 versus the Hawks in that series in round 2, the 76ers definitely missed him on both ends. Obviously most of the blame goes to Ben Simmons, you could blame Doc Rivers, but I think Danny Green going out in Game 4 did have a pretty big impact on both ends of the court, as I've said. Now he's coming off a 2-year, $30 million deal, and I'd expect him to get around mid-level money, around $5 to $10 million a year. There will be plenty of contenders will be interested in this guy. He's a 3-time NBA champion. Anyone that can, 3-and-D players, all contenders want you. And Danny Green, an experienced one at that, to be no shortage of teams offering him, big $5-10 million deal contracts. At number 5 now, got Evan Fournier, who's 28 years old, and last year averaged 13 points per game, 1.3 steals on 44% shooting from the field and 46% shooting from 3 on 6 threes a game. Now Fournier was not the big name player that Celtics fans wanted to be traded for at the deadline, but to be fair to him, I think he did it well in Boston. We all know by now that there's, that he's a great scorer. He's a 3-level scorer. He can score from behind the arc, mid-range, and also drives to the rim. Now, his problem is on the defensive end. He's not great defensively, but I think he'd fit in well. He fitted well with Boston, as a 3-point shooter, knockdown 3-point shooter, and he's coming off a $17 million contract he was on last year, and at 28 years old, in his prime. I expect this to be his last big contract. I expect him to stay in Boston because I think they need all the talent they can get at the moment, but I think they're making around similar money, around $17-18 million a year for multiple years. At number 4, I got Gary Trent Jr., who's 22 years old, and last year averaged 16.2 points per game, 1.1 steals a game, 3.6 boards on 35% shooting from 3 on 7 threes a game. Another player who got traded at the deadline from Portland to Toronto. Now, I was surprised that Portland are willing to let Gary Trent go, because he fit in very well in Portland. As a 3-and-D guy, I saw last year's playoffs as a Lakers fan. He knocked down so many threes against the Lakers in that first round. I think he's a great player. He can play on both ends. Great defender and great 3-point shooter, like Danny Green almost, but just 11 years younger. So I expect him to get a big contract with the Raptors. They'll be more than happy to keep him on for the foreseeable future. And I think he'll play a big part in the Raptors rebuild. So I think he'll be staying in Toronto for big enough money. At number 3, we got Victor Oladipo. Now this guy's fallen off a cliff, but let's just look at his stats last year. He's 28 years old, and last year he averaged 12 points per game, 1.8 steals, 3.5 assists per game on 37% shooting from the field and 23% shooting from 3. Now those stats aren't terrible, but Victor Oladipo in his prime used to be a max contract guy. Now look at him, he's more, I don't know what he is now at this stage. He's finally ended up in the place he wants to go with the Miami Heat, and they wanted him for a good while as well. So there should be no excuses, but the only thing holding him back really is his injury record. It's followed him everywhere for the last few years since he got injured with the Pacers, and he's never really looked the same ever since coming back from that injury. He played for 3 teams during the 2020-21 season. Started off the Pacers, didn't look great. Went to the Rockets, didn't look great. Went to the Heat, didn't look great. But dealt with injuries in all 3 teams. I think he's going to take a short-term contract, probably from the Heat, because the Heat have wanted him for a long time. I think the Heat will offer him a short-term deal to prove himself, and then maybe get a big contract when he's 30 years old. I don't know. But he's not worth a lot in my opinion at the moment. I wouldn't be going out of the way to sign this guy. He's 28 years old and been dealing with injuries for so many years. You know, he's not getting any younger, and injuries don't seem to go away the older you get. So maybe a short-term deal from the Heat to prove himself, and then maybe he comes 30 years old and gets another big deal. Hopefully he comes back to closest for myself, but I don't know, I wouldn't bet on it. At number 2, Tim Hardaway Jr, who's also 28 years old, and in last year's playoffs for the Mavericks, he averaged 17 points per game, 3.3 rebounds a game, on 40% shooting from 3 on 8 threes a game. Now Tim was unbelievable for the Mavericks in last year's playoffs, and he's definitely earned himself some extra money after that performance in the postseason. He's a big part of this Mavericks team, and last year he was making $18 million a year. I expect him to stay in Dallas, as he's a great 3-point shooter, a solid defender, for the similar price, you know, he's been getting these last few years. He's also a 28 in the prime of his career, so I definitely want to keep, if I'm a Mavericks fan, I definitely want to keep Tim Hardaway Jr. around. You know, he hit some very tough threes against the Clippers in that first round series, and Tim Hardaway Jr. was like, I don't know, a cap filler or something in that Kristaps Porzingis trade from New York to Dallas. But looking at how KP played in the playoffs and how Tim Hardaway played, Tim Hardaway was a real, you know, I think the Mavericks did very well to get him that next deal. I think he ended up proving that he's better than Porzingis last year. Obviously not talent-wise. If Porzingis get fully healthy, it's a different story. But last year, Tim Hardaway looked like the better piece in that Kristaps Porzingis deal. But at number 1, I've got Duncan Robinson, who's 26 years old, and last year averaged 13.1 points per game on 40% shooting from 3 on 8.5 threes a game. So taking a lot, hitting a lot. Also shooting 82% from the free throw line and 43% from the field. Now, Duncan is definitely, I think, the best shooting guard available on the market, just for his pure 3-point shooting. Plus, his NBA Finals experience playing with the Heat versus the Lakers in the bubble, and he'll be in high demand this offseason. At 26, Duncan Robinson is pretty much entering his prime, his best years, and I think there'll be a lot of teams out there. I think the Heat will pay up and give him what he wants. I think he's similar to, he's like this year's Joe Harris. I remember last year Joe Harris got like a big contract around, like, I couldn't believe the amount of money he got. I think Duncan Robinson is similar. Loads of teams will be out there looking for him. I do think he'll stay with the Heat. I think a lot from what he wants. I think he fits great beside Jimmy Butler, and yeah, he's only going to get better. If you know, you don't lose shooting with age. Look at Kyle Korver or something like that, or even, you know, even the best of them right now, Curry and them. They don't. Your 3-point shooting doesn't go away. So maybe he can be the next Kyle Korver or something. Play on for another 10, 12 years, and you know, as I said, NBA contenders, all of them want 3-point shooting. But anyway, guys, that's the video. Tell me which players you think I left out that I should have put in to this top 10 list. What positions would you change as well? Maybe you want Tim Hardaway number 1. Maybe you want JJ Redick out of the list. I don't know. You tell me. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to like the video, subscribe if you're new, and turn on notifications. Stay notified and upload. And all that said, I'm out of here.